Lillian is dressing one February evening when she sits down suddenly on the bed and covers her face with her hands. "My mum knows," she says. Alphonse sits up. He doesn't reach for her or tell her not to worry. He doesn't bundle her up and kiss her face. In that moment, Alphonse thinks of himself and of the viciousness of the mother he has heard about for 3 long months. The role of protest in contemporary society is to take on the establishment, is to give a voice to the other. More important now than ever before that people are speaking out about the things that are wrong in the world, that are wrong in their lives. We've only got to look at some contemporary versions of bad things that are happening in the world. Grenfell Tower, really local, Syrian refugee crisis across the other side of the world. Both of them need voices, both of them, and certainly if Grenfell Tower, if the people in Grenfell Tower had had a voice, none of that shit would have happened. But they weren't taken seriously, and the protests that are going on now about that are vital so that it doesn't happen again. Similarly with the Syrian refugee crisis, and lots of the stories that have been in the protest anthology are all about all the things that have been going on in the world historically and right up to the present day that are wrong and that people are saying are wrong, and we still need to know that these stories are being told over and over again so we don't forget. Lillian raises her head and looks at him. She knows Alphonse. She's furious with me. She was screaming some terrible things. Alphonse lights a cigarette and lays his arm on Lillian's shoulder. "Don't worry, Lily. She said I was a slut, Alphonse. She said I was cheap." Lillian wipes her eyes and grabs his hand. "What should we do?" "We have to be more careful, that's all." "Careful?" "Yes, Lily. Watch our step. I don't want no trouble." Lillian stands up straight. "I see." She pulls the belt tight on her mackintosh and feeds her slender feet into her stiletto heels. She ties her headscarf and places her handbag neatly in the crook of her arm. "When you're ready to be a man, Alphonse Maynard, you know where to find me," she says. The campaign and the protest came about because there was a colour bar in Smethwick, which is a place near Birmingham. There was a colour bar in the pubs, there was a colour bar in the clubs, lots of places where black people, newly arrived immigrants, couldn't go. Malcolm X was invited over from America to come and see just how bad it was, and he was shocked. Even a man that was coming from the terrible segregation in America was shocked that this kind of thing was happening so openly and so naked. So when I was invited to choose a protest to write about, I chose that particular event because it was so amazing that Malcolm X came to this tiny little suburb of Birmingham, and also because my father was a black man living very, very close to Smethwick in 1965 when this happened, and he married a white woman, and I can remember that my parents couldn't go many places together as an interracial couple. My mother was spat at regularly. We were spat at, we were name called at school. It was a very difficult time to be in a mixed race relationship, and a very difficult time to be a black man and a newly arrived immigrant. So some of what I wrote about was drawing on my father's experience and my mother's experience, but also it was just my neck of the woods. I'm from Birmingham, and it just felt a perfect blend of what happened to me as well as highlighting that protest. Alphonse sleeps not one single minute of that night. He squeezes his eyelids together and lies as still as his mourning body will allow, but peace can't find him. Lily has gone. Morning comes and Alphonse doesn't move. His alarms, and he throws the blasted thing to the ground. Lily has left him. He smokes cigarette after cigarette until his mouth begs for water. It's Friday, payday. Alphonse has missed his first ever day of work. So I worked with Avtar Singh Juhal, who had been instrumental in inviting Malcolm X over to the UK. And I went and interviewed him for quite a few hours, heard about the collar bar from someone who had experienced it, and there was a few incidents in my story, Exterior Paint, that drew on specific incidents that Avtar told me about. For example, a black man had gone into a pub, I think it's called the Blue Gate, and he had been refused service by a barmaid, and she'd done some name calling, and he'd slapped her around the face, and he was wanted by the police. And so I incorporated that into the story. It was fantastic to hear from someone who had actually been there. I would have been way too young. My father's dead, and it was really interesting to speak to someone who had felt these feelings, who remembered the discrimination, who it wasn't history to him, it was his real life. And it was great to get that feeling. Even when he spoke about Malcolm X, he had this sense of wonder still that this man had accepted the invitation and come over. So it was just amazing to work with someone and speak to someone who was really there. Then Alphonse notices at the top of the road a big group of men have gathered, some with notebooks out, some with cameras, and standing in the middle of the group is a tall black man in a hat and glasses. Alphonse pushes his head out of the window as far as he can without tumbling to the ground. "Can't be," he whispers. "Just can't be. There are 2 Indian men at the corner and a black woman too. Can't be." Alphonse is dressed in his trousers, shirt and socks in 25 seconds. He has his arm in the sleeves of his coat as he opens the front door. He stands at the gate and looks to the top of the road and the apparition. Can't be. It was rooted in personal experience, in as much as I used to work with children in care. I worked for social services, and I used to train foster carers. I also sit on the adoption panel for a couple of local authorities. So Leon's story is a very, very familiar story to me. Lots of children go into the care system with their siblings and are then parted from them. As far as, is it a story that had to be told? Yes, but that makes it sound as though I was on some kind of mission or it's an issue-based book. I basically wrote it because I wanted to write a good book. I didn't feel like I wanted to write a book that was going to beat anyone over the head and say, oh, look at this issue, isn't it terrible? If it makes people think more about children in care and siblings being split up, then that's great. But that isn't why I wrote it. I wrote it because I wanted to tell Leon's story. Then, suddenly, the black man walks away from the crowd, just him alone. He comes down Marshall Street looking left and right at the houses, at the for sale signs in the window, and the group at the top stand and watch. Someone is filming. And if they are filming this thing, says Alphonse out loud, it's because it is true. The man gets closer and closer, and as he walks past Alphonse, their eyes meet, black man to black man. And again, Alphonse feels a shift in his world. The black man walks to the corner of the road, and Alphonse has to follow. Malcolm X, his heart says over and over. Malcolm X. Well, I personally don't like books that tell me what to think about an issue. I don't like books that are overtly pushing the writer's thoughts about this particular thing. There is definitely a role for political writing, but sometimes I want to read a novel because I want to laugh, or I want to be scared, or I want to read a love story. And sometimes that's enough. That's enough for me for a novel. I think if we're talking about the modern day, it would almost be impossible to write a novel set in contemporary England that hasn't got some kind of political aspect to it. just because the world is so crazy at the moment. I think everything we write is going to touch on something to do with human rights, women's rights, the rights of children, vulnerable people, poverty, austerity. If we root it in the real world, those issues are going to come out. Get out of our country. Malcolm X doesn't turn his head, he doesn't answer, doesn't break his stride, nor cower. It's as if he can't see them or hear them. Like he's thinking his own thoughts, just a man out for a stroll on a winter's afternoon. There is no jeering, no name calling, nothing. So the short stories that I'm writing are about some of the B characters in My Name is Leon, and also in my second novel, which will be out in the spring, called Trick to Time. And the stories are just about some of the characters that I haven't quite let go of, and some of the interesting characters like Sylvia and Maureen, and it's their backstory or what happened to them after My Name is Leon has finished. When Malcolm X goes back to the group at the top of the road, he faces a camera and speaks. Alphonse can't hear what he says, but he knows it will be in the paper, it will be in the news, it will be all over the world that Malcolm X came to Marshall Street and walked strong with his back straight and his head high. The men slowly pack up their things, put their notebooks away, and then they are all gone. One of the most difficult things when you're starting out as an artist of any kind is having the connection, getting the training, eating, paying your electricity bill. And what I wanted to do in setting up the scholarship that I set up was give someone else from my background the opportunity to get trained, to have some contacts in the industry. So I funded a marginalised writer to do a Masters in Creative Writing at Birkbeck University, with all the fees paid, with some travel, with some subsistence so that they could get a cup of coffee and a sandwich at the end of the day. And after I had set this up, lots and lots of people that I knew jumped on board and gave the scholar a laptop. The staff at Waterstones donated the reading list, lots of other people, Penguin Random House, the Word Factory, my agent, all got together and also contributed, because I recognise how hard it is to start and to get a foot in the door if you're from a marginalised community. But so do lots of other people. And I think since then there have been lots of other initiatives to help people from disadvantaged, marginalised backgrounds get on and have a chance. And if we don't, the arts are going to continually be populated by people with trust funds from privileged backgrounds, from a very, very small sector of society that are going to be gatekeeping what is on television, what's in film, what's in books, and that could never represent the whole of the community.